Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of How to Build a Modern Deck Lands Edition. I posted the first part last year, I think, many months ago, maybe mid-year. Make sure you check out part 1. It's going to be way longer than this video. I think that was close to 30 minutes, but it was pretty comprehensive, and you know how many lands you should put in your deck, what the calculations are, so on and so forth, what happens when you have mana dorks. I think it's pretty important and useful for, especially for newer players, and it's been a pretty successful video, and I've had a lot of people tell me, hey, when are you gonna make part 2? So here's part 2. We're gonna be a lot more brief. I'm gonna try and stick to one topic, and then maybe it'll be a part 3 and a part 4 to expand a bit more, because lands are a complex part of Magic. They are integral to the game, and this is why a lot of lands are also very expensive. So before I get into all that, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button down below and that notification bell, maybe even that like button. Those clicks take you a few seconds, but it really goes a long way for this channel, so thank you. Alright, so before I get to the main topic, I want to cover something quickly because it's gonna make a lot more sense when I give you my ideas of the types of lands you should be choosing for your deck. So let's talk about the resources of the game. You know, Magic has many resources. You know, apart from your life and your hand and your graveyard and all that, it's arguable that there's energy, and even your creatures can be a resource. But when we talk about the main resources I see, first we got your life. Your life total is a resource. It's not just some countdown to you losing. You can use your life total as resource to get ahead in the game and further advance your strategy. We also have your lands. Obviously, those are your main resource, or at least what everyone sees as your main resource, and that'll always be the case. They're pretty much integral for most decks to do what you want to do. And you have your graveyard. The cards that end up in your graveyard can also be used. If you think about Delve and all the other types of abilities that require cards in your graveyard could also be used as a resource. So these are the main things I look at when I'm looking at furthering my game plan in any game. These are the main resources I focus on. So let's take a look at non-basic lands. This is going to be the main topic of this video, and we're going to start with Steam Vents. Well, really, it's just there to represent all shock lands. These are basically lands that produce two colors, or one of two colors you choose each time you tap it, and it can come into the battlefield untapped immediately if you pay 2 life. Now, for me, it's pretty much non-negotiable that when I'm playing a 2+ color deck, you have to have shock lands in the deck. Now, we're going to just assume that budget is not a factor here. We just want to assume that you want to have a game plan that, you know, is the most competitive possible. You got to have your shock lands. There's just no two ways around it. If you're not playing shock lands in a multicolored deck, you are likely not being the most efficient possible. Obviously, they're going to be properly paired with fetch lands, so you can actually fetch for them whenever you want to. But for me, shock lands are where I start. I don't even start with fetch lands when I'm building a mana base. I start up, okay, what are the shock lands that I need? And the main factor here is you could have them come into play the turn that they come in untapped, and you could use them immediately. Now we're talking about modern, obviously, so we're not going to talk about legacy and vintage where you have the original duels. It's a different, I mean, those are even more broken, let's be honest. Here it's slightly fixed, you got to pay 2 life, but a lot of people shy away from this. I've heard a lot of comments like saying, man, you really use your life, you really get your life total really low really quickly. But you know, they say that in matches where I also inevitably win. And yes, sometimes you can lose by a couple of life points, but in my experience in a lot of decks that you play, if you lost by a couple of life points, you were going to lose anyway. That's just how it is. So, I mean, it's very rare that you lose at exactly 0 life. You end up being minus something, right? So, for me, it's perfectly fine to be really aggressive with your life total if it means being able to use the mana when it comes into play immediately and producing the colors that you need. So that's really your shock lands. And everything else now that I'm going to get to is going to pale in comparison to shock lands. Let's start with Blackleaf Cliffs. This cycle, or basically any cycle where the land may come into play tapped for whatever reason. If you don't meet a certain condition, or just hard comes into play tapped, you have no choice. For me, these cards are a lot less appealing. And these, as you can see in all the decks I've deck teched in the past 2 some years, I play very little I play very little lands that produce 2 colors or more than 2 colors that have this type of condition on them. These are fast lands. These are the closest that I get to playing cards that are not shocks, are the fast lands, because generally speaking, you know, early in the game, you could play them turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and that's super important. You definitely don't want to be stuck with a land, with a 1-lander hand or a 2-lander hand, and you can't even play your lands. That's a problem. So, you know, the Blackleaf Cliffs and all the other fast lands are the cards that I would go to next. If I'm playing 19 plus lands in my deck, or 18 plus lands in my deck, then I could start looking at these as a potential card to add to, you know, as a potential land to add to the whole land set. But realistically, I stay away from them anyway because I rather just play more fetches and shocks to get to the colors that I need. So just keep that in mind. I know it's controversial, a lot of people disagree with me, but I've been perfectly fine with all of my decks going with this current strategy that I'm going with. So just keep that in mind. But if you're running out of shocks, these are the next cards I would go with, fast lands in particular. Then you got Creeping Tar Pit, or other man lands, or they're called man lands, essentially lands that can also be turned into creatures temporarily, or some man lands that aren't really man lands, just generate a creature. You could pay some amount of mana and they'll create a token or whatever. I'm kind of pulling them all into this category. Listen, most of these man lands come into the battlefield tapped anyway, so already that's an X for me. That's already a problem. I would be playing these in 20, 24 plus land decks. Then that's when I would start looking at potentially playing a man land, because the odds are a lot lower that they're going to be in your opening hand, forcing you to mulligan or just not having perfect mana in the early turns of the game. And remember, in Modern, the early turns of the game for most decks are super important. So if you don't have your lands and you don't have the right colors, you could just lose the game several turns before you realize it. And when it comes to man lands, my other problem is when your opponent, when I kill a man land, when I destroy it with a lightning bolt or Path to Exile or however way I figure out a way to kill it, it is the best feeling in the world, because not only have I removed the threat from my opponent, they have now 1 less mana to play with. So, you know, if you're going to be playing man lands, you better be sure you are, like I said, you're playing 20 plus or 24 plus lands in your deck. It's okay if you lose one, because you probably have many others to replace it. Because if you lose it and you're down to 2 or 3 lands, you're going to be in big trouble. And I've seen my opponents, you know, in those situations often. I feel great, they don't. Up next, Cavern of Souls, or basically any non-basic land that produces colorless mana, or wingding mana, whatever you want to call. Obviously, Cavern of Souls has seen less play over the years, but I'm using this as an example. You could replace this with essentially any land that produces colorless now. In particular, in decks that use 3 or more colors, I, as a general rule, stay away from lands like this. If a land I play does not produce color, or, you know, more than 1 color for the colors that I'm playing in the deck, I stay away. It doesn't matter really how important that land is. I just stay away because, again, you don't want to be stuck with that and then be off a color for a good part of the game. You could lose, and you could, you know, any benefit that colorless land, in this case Cavern of Souls, would bring you would just go away. Same goes for Ghost Quarter, very similar. It produces 1 wingding. When you sacrifice it, you also lose a land. So you're going to be playing Ghost Quarter in decks where you're already doing some sort of resource denial for your opponents, where you're playing a lot of lands anyway. That's where a card like Ghost Quarter makes sense. But for me, for example, when I'm playing Temur Delver, I have tried Ghost Quarter and all the other iterations of this type of ability. None of them work. I hate it all. When it's there, it's just a sore thumb. This is why I stay away from them. And this is why I would recommend you staying away from them as well. Unless, again, your game plan has something to do with resource denial, mana denial, color denial. Or you are playing enough mana for me to sweet numbers 20 plus. If you're playing 20 plus, then you have the luxury of playing these type of lands. Last but not least, pathway lands that were introduced recently in Magic in general. Now these lands are pretty cool. Okay, they come, I suppose, as close to shock lands as you can get. Although, again, when you play them, you have to pick a side, and then you're stuck with that side for the rest of the game. which is not the end of the world. You know, it's better than nothing, and you can use them immediately at all points in the game, which is always a great benefit. I haven't warmed up to them as much as others have, but pathways are not a horrible land to include in your mana base. Especially if you're looking for budget versions, I would probably look at pathways and the fast lands as my alternatives. And for sure, if you are playing a multicolor deck and you're playing, 19, 20 plus lands, you can make room for some pathways in there as well, as long as you are solid in your shock and fetch land package. And that's pretty much all I want to share with you in this video about lands. I could probably talk for hours about lands, but I'm not going to. I'm going to keep this as short as possible. I'm rambling. Let me know in the comment section down below how you look at non-basic lands and how you construct your mana bases. Again, I really recommend you do take a look at part 1. I'll put a link in the description of this video. Spend some time, watch it, and get some base knowledge on lands, and then revisit maybe this video, watch my non-basic discussion. But this is really how I look at lands, and I think we should really be a bit more aggressive in using our life totals to get the lands that we need, or the colors that we need, as soon as possible. I see a lot of decks that get stuck not having the mana that they need early on because they just, they had a land that came in tapped and they got to wait an extra turn to use it. No problem, that's an advantage for me because I'm going to be able to use my lands immediately. I'm going to be ahead of you on curve. And you got to be playing some really impactful spells to be able to hurt yourself, to handicap yourself essentially, in terms of one of, if not the main resource in the game. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe and hit that notification bell down below. Those few clicks go a really long way in helping others find my content and helps my channel grow. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook, share my content on social media. That also helps others find their way to my videos and spreads the word even further. And of course, if you like making money, check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description of this video. In particular, check out the Patreon Rewards program. Basically works like this. You give me your Patreon dollars every month. I buy and open up sealed product on this channel using those dollars. And I send you back that money at the end of every year in the form of rares and mythics. You get one non-bulk rare or mythic for every consecutive month you've been a patron, and every card is worth anywhere between $3 and $15. But I mean, even if you lowball it at an average of $5 per card, you're at the very least getting your money back, but odds are you're getting even more. There are a lot more details on my Patreon page, so check it out. Thanks, and have a good one.